it difficult reprising the role, and how did you approach it?
In some ways it was difficult reprising the role. I think mostly because of the expectation of what she had become or who she turned out to be. And yet, at the same time, she can be so many different things, and that's what's what's her charm, that's what's great about her, that potentially there's a lot of fun to be had with her. So it was really, I guess it was really two things.
Okay. Okay. Are you relying on the audience to have some familiarity with your character, or do you feel Anne has grown enough to allow a more personal and different interpretation?
Undeniably, the audience has a relationship already with her. There will be expectations of who this girl is, because there are 8 hours of screen time already showing us a lot about her. A lot about her is a story that's already been told. So to me, you can't erase that. That is very much a part of who she was, and you've seen her through stages of her life. And then, of course, now this is a departure, because not only is the material completely new, and the circumstances are completely new, she has had to be grown into something. So one isn't exclusive of the other. To me, people have a very strong opinion of who they think Anne is, and I certainly had my own. And certainly have continued to have my own opinion about that. And a lot of that's informed from who she is, where she came from. I don't think you can erase a great deal of who somebody is. I mean, we are an accumulation of everything that has come before us. And so then the challenge with her is, then what has she become today, or who has she become? And that's all based on who she was, to a degree.
Was it based on a lot of her new circumstances too, facing at the time of the war?
Right.
How did that impact her?
Well, the biggest character in this, other than Anne, is the war. I mean, it's the biggest factor in this piece that affects everybody's lives. So I think, I guess what's interesting about that is when you take a circumstance that's bigger than any one person's personal dreams or desires, and it's you're acting it out on a world stage, which is enormous, and where the consequences and the conditions and the circumstances are they're huge. It's somewhat Greek in its proportions. It's I mean, certainly the piece is epic that way. And then you put this young woman into that environment and see how she survives, in a sense. How is she changed or influenced by the war, really? And how does it get in her way and interfere with her dreams of who she thought she was going to be and how she thought life was going to go? That's, to me, one of the most interesting things about putting it in this time frame, is that you set up, I mean, there's a couple burps along the way in terms of going to New York and her dreams being slightly shafted. I think the thing with Anne, to me, I always think of Anne as a bit of a tragic clown. She's always set up and she falls. And so part of what's interesting is watching what's the setup going to be, how is she going to fall, and how is she going to recover. And that's part of her, a bit of her trademark. And that is her flaw, is that she always sets herself up to fall, or is set up to fall. And then, as I said, brushes herself off and rises above it, or tries to rise above it. So you have this idyllic place, Prince Edward Island, and you have the great setup, you have the fiance, you have Gilbert Blythe, you have these young people very much in love at the top of their game, as far as I'm concerned. And then you introduce something that's bigger than all of them that takes the dream away, and it's called the war. And now everything that we thought was going to be set up a certain way is taken away. And then she goes out to get back the one person and the one thing that's the most important to her, which is her fiance or then her husband. So that's sort of how I look at the story. That's kind of the journey that she goes on.
That's fascinating.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, no one has ever mentioned that. So that's great.
Right.
Okay.
Thrown you though, hasn't it? And now what do we do with that? Now that that's what I think about it.
Where's the other character here? I'm like, get the more in here.
Yeah, no, but it's true.
Yeah, no, you absolutely.
Because it's not an inconsequential event, and it's not a small event. It's the biggest event. It was the Great War. So for whatever reason, Kevin has chosen to put it in that time frame. It is not. It can't be secondary. It has. It is. It's the other huge character, as I said in the piece.
Fantastic. Okay. In your opinion, you sort of touched on this briefly, but in your opinion, what makes the character of Anne Shirley so endearing to fans worldwide?
To me, it's because she is a tragic clown, and it's because she. It is the sense of humor that she has, and that I was desperately looking for in her, because that's what I like about her. I like that she is the first person to put her foot in her mouth. And also she's very clever, so her own pride, I mean, the thing of pride comes before the fall is a big issue for Anne, because she has a very healthy ego, and at times it's her downfall. She really walks into things she doesn't see coming, although other people see them coming. And then you watch her get out of it, or, as I said, rise above it, or figure out a way through it. And I think the best thing about playing Anne is that anything goes, for me. as far as I'm concerned, anything goes with Anne. She really has the complete, all the colors of the rainbow in her character. She can be in absolute bitter tears one minute, and then into joyous laughter, and then into despair, and then into joy. And she bounces around because she's a very full person. She's not somebody who is shut down. She's not. She's eccentric, but she's not neurotic, and there's a big difference.
How would you describe that difference?
Well, I think neuroses has you trapped in yourself. You are a victim of your circumstances. And I think the thing with Anne is she's not a victim. And that's why so many people, and particularly women, go, oh, thank God. You know, she's not a victim. She's eccentric because she is absolutely open. And so therefore, in some people's eyes, it's too much. It's like she's too joyous or she's too in despair, but there's no barrier. She doesn't filter herself. She doesn't censor herself. And certainly she didn't as a child. So I think the thing about having someone grow up is the parameters around which we allow children to experience things are not the same we allow for adults. The very things that we find endearing in children are the things that we label people crazy for in adults. And so it's kind of bridging that gap with her, because I think all those elements of her are still there, and now she's functioning in a world where she's an adult, and she, is either working in the London Dispatch or the New York Publishing House. But the part of Anne that's still the twinkle is that part that really doesn't care about how other people perceive her on the one hand. However, she's also deeply concerned about how people perceive her. So it's always a flip-flop with her, which is fun to play.
Okay, great. Does Anne at any point give up on Gilbert?
I don't think so. I don't think she does. I think that, to me, it's an epic love story. To me, is the strongest. Excuse me. I hope we'll just cut that out. No, I think it's a love story. I think that you take an orphan who's then won over the hearts of a community and found a place of belonging. And the first Anne was really about finding a place of belonging. And the second Anne was about establishing that sense of belonging and going beyond that. And through that, she found her nemesis and that person she kept rubbing up against, which was Gilbert, who then ultimately became her soulmate after she had a whole lot of highfalutin ideas about what she thought love was. She finally got back to the fact, no, love is actually you, and it's real, and it's very, it's not all those airy-fairy ideas in my head. And so then this story is really about their relationship.
It's a different relationship now.
It's a different relationship. They're grown up. They're very much in love. They are best friends. They've already gone through those trials. That's not what, they don't have to prove that. What happens is he's taken away from her. And then she has to fight for the one piece of family she has left, and that's her husband, because she's lost Matthew and Marilla. They've both passed away. So I think there are obstacles that come into that. And obviously the biggest obstacle is the other leading man, is Jack. I always looked at it this way. I always thought it's great. Here you are, you're going along in life, and you found the perfect person. And it's perfect. And then someone interesting comes along that is also kind of perfect. And you don't think that there could be two perfect people out there, or you thought everything was going a certain way, and all of a sudden life throws something from the side and catches you. And so that's the dynamic I found kind of interesting about the characters of Anne and Jack. And what is it about him? What does he offer that she's looking for that she hasn't fully realized in her relationship with Gilbert? And so, and part of it, I guess, is the daredevil part of him, because I think Anne is ultimately a daredevil too. I think that's, and the fact that he's a writer the way Anne is, so they have a common language that she doesn't actually share with her soulmate. And I think that's very real, that all of a sudden life throws somebody your way that throws you off guard. At the same time, I think he also drives her a bit insane, a bit crazy, because I sort of look at Anne and Jack as fire and oil. They can't help it when they're around each other. Something always pisses one or the other off. At the same time, they're very attracted to each other. And that's fun to play, because then it's like, is something going to happen? Is something not going to happen? Is Anne going to stray off the path from Gilbert? Ooh, I don't know. So that's what we're kind of exploring with that. But the fact that you have the backdrop of war, to me, tells you there are no rules to the game. You put it in a time where the rules are the rules of morality and everything has been, it's been heightened. The black and whites are not so black and white anymore. It's very gray. And so it allows, I think, for that, whatever that journey is between those other two characters, between Anne and Jack, they're caught up in a somewhat chaotic world. So whether we've achieved any of that, I really couldn't tell you. But that was the thinking behind it, for as far as I was concerned.
Yeah. It was it.
I'll see you guys turn that down just a touch.
It was difficult.
And we're back up, we're rolling.
Okay. How does Anne Shirley measure up as a heroine of such proportion?
I think she's a great heroine. I think potentially she can be anything. To me, there are very few rules that apply. One of the things that I felt very strongly about that I did not want her to become was a damsel in distress. That did not interest me, and I thought that was not true to who Anne Shirley was and had been established as being. And I didn't want to present that to young women and girls as saying, here's a girl who's the smartest in her class, who basically wins over an entire community as an orphan and does it her way. The thing about Anne is that she's smart enough to know what to say, but she's always ultimately true to herself. And therefore, as a woman, I didn't want her to fall into a typical storyline for a female, have her be the damsel in distress. I think that would be doing a tremendous disservice to the kind of character that Anne is. She is a bigger-than-life character. We're not talking about a realistic person necessarily. She is a heroine. She is a Canadian icon. That's who she is, and therefore I think anything can go with her. So I do think she measures up. I don't know how I don't know how all the pieces will come together. I know that that's certainly how I saw her, or what I didn't want her to become. I didn't want to have people turn on the television and watch Anne in an episode of Baywatch, however smashing I might have looked in the bikini. I really didn't want to put that element forward. I have a daughter myself, and the thing about Anne is that she's always judged ultimately for being a person before she is judged being a female or a male. It's not a question of that, it's for the content of her mind and how she ends up, what she ends up achieving or not achieving, or who she ends up winning over or not winning over, or what trials and tribulations she goes through. But she's judged very much for being, for the content of her mind, being who she is. And there's not a lot of those out there. There's not a lot of those female roles out there. I mean, there are some for sure, and I think audiences and men and women, we need more of that. So I think she's potentially a great heroine for that.
Okay, great. Let's see. Did you want to talk any more about Jack? I don't know. I don't know. What do you want to ask me?
What do you want to ask?
I just thought, well, it sort of certainly adds a new element to the whole, we've seen Anne and Gilbert, we've seen Anne and Gilbert, and now there's Anne Gilbert and Jack.
And Anne Gilbert and Jack, and we're all getting along quite well together. I like the idea that even though Jack might, he's not particularly trustworthy, or he certainly becomes rather questionable, but he's damn good looking. And and I thought the thing that was interesting is that he's actually in love with her, because she's a very different kind of woman than he's used to interacting with. And she throws him for a big loop. I mean, he thinks he can do his number and sweep her off her feet, and that's not what happens. He comes up against someone who's as smart, if not smarter than he is. She's a better writer than he is. He realizes that. And he can't put her in a box. He can't categorize her. And so part of his journey, I think, that's what he learns through this woman called Anne, is that, she gives him a run for his money. And likewise, he gives her a run for her money in a different way than Gilbert, because he is living life on the edge. He is up to a bunch of things. Sometimes I'm not exactly sure what he's up to. I hope other people can figure that out, because I sure couldn't sometimes. But he's also very attractive, and I think that she is drawn to that sometimes in spite of him, and I think that's very real. I think that there's something that just, as I said, they're just, when they get around each other, there's a friction that is, it's not easeful, but I think that's kind of fun, that's sort of playful.
Great.
We're over 60, we're at 20 minutes.
Are we? Wow.
You'll never use it all.
No, that's...
Sort of like this miniseries. We shoot and we
Is there
shoot.
anything else you want to, I'm just, storyline. Like, we talked a little bit about how it deviates from the original works of Lucy Montgomery. Do you want to go on, or are you concerned with carrying the audience despite this? Do you think there'll be some, or should we not?
I think that's probably a question to ask Kevin, because that's very much his choice. It was his choice to do that. See what he had in mind.
Okay.
And let me know.
All right. What else? I don't know, did you have to do any researching on the, sort of how people were reacting to the war at that time?
Yeah, I did. I watched a number of documentaries about the Great War, and I read some novels about the Great War, and I also read a lot of certain poets, and particularly people like Sassoon and Wilfred Owen. And actually, it was a great education for me because I didn't know much about the Great War. I didn't realize the impact that it had, and really how it's set the stage for most of this century, and how it really was the end of a certain era, a certain type of, I can't really say innocence because God knows there was a series of wars before then, but there was a whole series of ethics and things that came into play before that then were just the whole face of the earth changed. The whole, I mean, when there was the introduction of chemical warfare, genocide, huge things were all of a sudden introduced to a whole generation of people, and consequently a whole generation of people not only lost their lives, but lost their youth. I mean, and it really, so that, I think that's a really, that's why it's not a inconsequential element to the story. It is a huge backdrop to put the piece against. One is saying something with it. I mean, Kevin Sullivan is choosing to say something by having it put against that time frame. It will automatically say something about the world by having it, because it isn't Road to Avonlea. I mean, although I guess they're up to that phase in the story as well, but it isn't that time. It's not a time of innocence. That time abruptly comes to an end, where people thought the world was one way and war was something, and then we're in for a serious shock. So it was an education for me.
Perfect.